Welcome to my living room. I'm realizing that this was probably not the best day to try to film anything. Dreary, cold in Texas in February is not normal. Wouldn't normally be this bundled up sitting in the house. But I wanted to start filming and start talking about my creative sewing journey, I guess. I've always thought of myself as a creative person, or at least wanted to be a creative person. My grandmother was very creative. She did a lot of knitting and crocheting and things like that. But nobody in my family ever really sewed. I don't remember my grandmother, my mother's mother. I don't remember her ever having a sewing machine in the house or anything like that. She was primarily a fiber artist, which I definitely still do. Sitting right next to me, there is some nice knitting I've been working on. But I always wanted to learn how to sew. I liked the idea of wearing something that you made with your hands. I like to cook. I like to, be able to experience the act of creation, I guess, as it were. And the past year, I was unemployed, as many people were, working in the hospitality industry, and suddenly found myself with an extreme amount of time on my hands. And I was never big into watching things on YouTube. Every once in a while, if there was I needed to remind myself how to do something in knitting or crocheting or a recipe or anything like that. But I didn't watch it with any kind of regularity. And one day early on, struggling with depression and self-worth and not really knowing what I was going to do with myself while I was unemployed, I found myself across a sewing video. I think it might have been one of Bernadette Banner's. If you're not familiar, she's delightful. You should definitely watch her. I think it was one of her videos, and she was so good about making this beautiful aesthetic content, not necessarily tutorials, and it was a lot of historic era things, medieval and turn of the century, 1800s to 1900s, kind of things like that. Things that I've always loved, going to the Ren Fair and things like that, but I never really made my own things. So I loved watching her videos with her journey in making things and being an historian and looking at things from almost an archaeological perspective, which I appreciate as somebody with degrees in anthropology and archaeology. Looking at the clothing people wore in different time periods, different eras, different geographical settings, the fibers they would use, the techniques they would use. I was never someone who was into clothing. Clothing was utilitarian. You wore it outside, so you were not being inappropriately naked. And I just really found myself enjoying watching some of these people who do historic costuming, and not only historic costuming, but are wearing historic garments on a daily basis. Even if you're not in the community, there's someone in England, Zach Pinsett, who is also delightful. He wears essentially Regency clothing, so early 1800s, on a daily basis. That is his clothing. It's not a costume. He's not doing it for attention. It's just what he likes to wear. And I appreciated that self-awareness is something I've always had, but I think I was too scared or just not confident enough to do those kind of things. And I'm watching these videos with these young people, in their 20s, who are, very aware of themselves and what they want to do and the kind of people they want to be. And as somebody who just turned 40 and was never really confident in doing that, I got a lot of enjoyment out of seeing, again, especially younger people, just really being confident and in knowing who they are and then sharing their stories on YouTube. So I kind of, again, fell down the YouTube rabbit hole and found all these different people who do historical costuming, historical clothing, doing sewing videos. Again, some actually tutorial, and others just we're here for the pretty aesthetic content, as it were. And I started my own journey on those creative endeavors. I had never made a garment. I had even knitting and crocheting. It was accessories, it was scarves, hats, gloves. Even right now I'm knitting a shawl. These are wearable items, but they are not a sweater or trousers or anything like that, that are an entire piece of a garment. So I had a sewing machine already at home that was rarely used, because this is something I had wanted to do in the past. And I picked myself up some fabric and a couple of basic big three patterns. One was a retro pattern from Simplicity. I think another one was a new look pattern or something to that effect. And I made a skirt in maybe October-ish. So I made my first wearable garment, and then I made a dress, which was not awful. The pattern was easy to understand. It was a full basic pattern that's literally saying attach this piece to this piece, finish this seam this way. So I learned a lot just making those two garments, and have made a couple other small pieces. I haven't gone as far as trying to make something like a blouse or pants, trousers, anything like that. I am 90% of the way of making a chemise, a medieval-ish era chemise that I've done completely by hand. I've hand sewn every seam. It basically needs finishing and a neckline and final hemming and final little details. And I've just been intimidated, I think, to finally finish it. Maybe one of these days I will show you, and that will give me an excuse to finally finish it. The Ren fairs for me are not going to happen this year. I don't necessarily feel like wearing a mask outside for several hours and feeling like I can't hug people that I haven't seen in a long time. So I've got time to finish up some projects that I would love to have a mostly handmade outfit for next Ren fair. And my home fair is Tudor, Henry VIII, mid 1500s. So that'll be a 2021 project for sure. But the project I did ultimately want to talk about today is this guy right here. So I picked this pattern up from a company online called Past Patterns, and this is a pattern for something called a Hobble dress, Hobble. The pattern was dated from 1912. It was 15 cents when it was sold from the Pictorial Review Company out of New York City. And when it said that this was not a beginner's pattern with few instructions, they were not lying. They were not under-exaggerating or over-exaggerating. This is the instructions. And that's pretty much it. There is actually some very nice cutting grids so there's a little bit of information. There's actually some very nice historical information about waistline finishing, the American College of Dressmaking. So there's a little bit of information here, but this is far out of my knowledge base with sewing. And not only in terms of technique, dressmaking technique, considering I've literally made one dress, the idea of, I thought, making an historic dress would be a challenge, but not impossible. and this stymied me very, very badly. The lack of instructions, like, I think these are buttons right here. I think. It does not tell you. I believe these are closure buttons. It does not tell you. It is made to be one piece, so you attach it here. It does have some information about how they made internal waistbands, so the weight of the skirt does not pull down the weight of the bodice, which is useful. I have everything cut out for the mock-up. I started to make the bodice. It has zero instruction on how to attach this little trim here. It says it is not lined, so it is just one piece. And I guess this is a little bit, there's nothing wrong with this pattern. Again, if they are assuming that women living in this era, or the seamsters, not all dressmaker were women. One of the most famous dressmakers, Worth, in France, was a man. He had a team of women probably working for him. But I would be curious to give this pattern to someone who has a lot of experience, the Bernadette Banners, the Kathy Hayes, these people who do have a lot of experience working with extant historical patterns. I would be curious to give this to one of them and see if they could figure it out. Some of the notches don't match up, some of the sizing doesn't make any sense. And especially what you have to know, you have to understand the silhouette of the clothing for this era. So for instance, this pattern is for a 38 bust, and it should end up with the hip measurement being 43.5 to 44. For a lot of people, that's not a natural hourglass sort of silhouette. And it says the waistline should be 42 inches. That's not too far off from how I am built, but I still have to size this up because I do not have a 38 bust. And what I've learned is a lot of these patterns came in one size, what was sort of maybe an average size. And you were expected to know how to size them up, how to size them down, how to make your own adjustments. And when you could not do that, you were just expected to understand and already have the knowledge to make these garments. And you were looking for a specific silhouette. So if you are bigger up front but have smaller hip measurements, you don't size it down to meet your hips. You pad. You have a corset underneath. They were still wearing corsets. This would have been what is called the Edwardian period. There was an Edwardian silhouette corset even in these slimline dresses, and these were considered slimline. These aren't bustle dresses. These aren't, crinoline needing large skirts. These are considered slim, but they were still doing a certain amount of padding underneath. So I started the bodice. It did not fit because I am not a 38 bust. So not only do I have to figure out this trim situation, this little trim situation that doesn't make any sense, and then where I'm supposedly supposed to put buttons, because you are supposed to close it. It's almost a military style where it wraps around. Let me not touch my mic. Where it kind of wraps around and attaches on the shoulder, but it only has the buttons here. The buttons kind of stop right about here, so it almost looks like there'd still be an overlap. And in my experience, I am making a mock-up of this. Again, as I said, I didn't even get to the skirt because I got so frustrated with it. And for what I've made in the past, I have figured out, you figure it out as you go along. If you're that kind of kinesthetic learner, just looking at this doesn't make any sense. But once you do start putting the pieces together, the pieces start to fit together, to use a cliched kind of analogy. So I know I need to just go and do it. I just don't want to because it's intimidating me. And I think a lot of us who are creative people, consider myself a creative person, I am miles behind a lot of the creative people in my life, and artists that I'm a fan of, people online, people in the public sphere. I think some people see something complicated or something amazing that someone's made and says, I can do that, I can learn, I can make that thing. I tend to tell myself, oh, there's no way. I could do this for 10 years and there's no way. And I just have to keep on telling myself, well, you have to do it. You build experience just like anything. For instance, I've been a dancer in the past. You don't pick up Balanchine on day 2. That's after years of experience and training, and not that I was a ballet dancer, but you don't pick it up overnight. You have to practice. You have to learn. And learning in this case is finding dressmaking and sewing manuals from the late 1800s and early 1900s, which is fun unto itself if you like to learn, which I do. This is a crazy learning curve. But I'm hoping that by documenting this for the 0 people who would want to watch this, if it'll act as an impetus to myself to actually do it, and God forbid somebody comes across this and wants to struggle with this along with me, that would be lovely. So I think I might make this maybe a very short series of videos. No sewing's happening today because I can't see anything in the house, but the next nice day where my sewing room is very lightly bright, and after I've done a little bit more research and trying not to just use the excuse of research as a reason to avoid actually starting, I'll show you what I have so far next time and go from there. I have the fabric. I bought this lovely taffeta. Very nice. Supposedly, even though this is a fairly stiff material with the little bit of the kind of ruching, it's got a little bit of stretch to it. We will see. Yeah, we'll go from there.